Hello everyone, this is Chromý and together we will continue the course Interdisciplinary Approaches to Language and its Use. This is the third out of 4 presentations which are devoted to the acquisition of words. Let's continue our discussion of the factors which influence the word learning. We have already considered innate abilities, the role of input, and 2 principles proposed as crucial for word learning, namely the whole object bias and the mutual exclusivity assumption. In this presentation, we will first focus on social cognition and its relation to word learning, and then we will address the idea of the so-called syntactic bootstrapping. Social cognition is a broad term which refers to an ability to view others as social agents and understand their social behavior. Social cognition enables us to understand the intentions, beliefs, desires, and perspectives of other people. This ability develops gradually during childhood, and many researchers stress out that it is crucial for language acquisition. The importance of social cognition may be seen on individuals whose social cognition is severely impaired, such as individuals with autism spectrum disorder, who may have very huge problems in acquiring language. Let's go through a few studies on social cognition. The first study we will concern here is the paper by Susan Johnson, Virginia Slaughter, and Susan Carey. They were interested in the gaze following in young infants and its relation to social cognition. They let the 12-month-olds to interact with a robot which either had or did not have a face. The robot either interacted meaningfully or not. Meaningful interaction was done using beeping and blinking, which was a reaction towards infants' vocalizations and movements. The authors found that when the robot interacted meaningfully, the infants followed its gaze, independently whether the robot had a face or not. However, if the robot did not interact meaningfully and had no face, they tended not to follow its gaze. This is important finding because it shows that the 12-month-olds are driven by intentionality in their gaze following. Gaze following as such is definitely important for word learning because it helps the children to understand what the caregiver is talking about. Michael Tomasello and Michelle Barton conducted several experiments with 2-year-olds which tested the role of social cognition in word learning. Let's have a look at the design of the study. Children saw a scene with 5 buckets. In each bucket there was a different object which could not be seen. The main principle was that the experimenter wanted to find the toma. She said, "Where's the toma? Let's find the toma. Where's the toma? Let's see what's in here." There were 2 conditions. In the first one, the experimenter found the object immediately and gasped, "Ah!" and then gave the toy to the child. This was the condition without search. In the second one, the experimenter first tried 2 other buckets, looked at the objects, and returned them back to the bucket. The right object was found in the third bucket, and the experimenter gasped, "Ah!" and gave the toy to the child. The children in both conditions were tested the same way. Their task was to give the toma to the experimenter. Interestingly, the rate of success was the same in both conditions. This means that the children did not relate the word toma to the first object they saw, but they monitored experimenters' intentions and used this information in establishing what is the toma. The last study we will mention considering the relation between social cognition and language development is a well-known paper by Heinz WIMMER and Joseph PERNER. Often the findings of this study are interpreted as an evidence for the developing theory of mind. The task they employed is known as the false belief task. They tested 3 groups of children, 3 to 4-year-olds, 4 to 6-year-olds, and 6 to 9-year-olds, and they wanted to establish how these three groups differ in understanding wrong beliefs of other people. The principle of the task was that a person A put an object to a certain place and left the room. Then another person entered and moved that object to a different place. Children had to say where would the person A look for the object. Interestingly, the authors found that the 3 to 4-year-olds were not able to answer the task correctly at all. Children between 4 and 6 years were better, but only 57% of them answered the question correctly. As you can see, even the oldest tested group also made some errors. The task is quite complex and controversial. There have been various disputes about the explanation of the findings in the literature. Still, we can say that this task informs us that the social cognition is developing gradually during childhood. Now let's turn our attention briefly to the so-called syntactic bootstrapping. One factor which may help children to acquire words may be their knowledge of grammar. Syntactic bootstrapping lies in the principle that the syntactic context gives us certain information on the meaning of the word. Let's have a look at the example with the pseudo-word rod. Let's assume that it is an existing word in English and we do not know it. If we would hear a sentence, Peter rods the table, we would come to a conclusion that rod is a verb which describes an event which may be done with a table. This would dramatically reduce the potential meanings it could have. On the other hand, if we would encounter the sentence Peter shakes the rod, it would be certain that the rod is a noun and that it is an object which is possible to shake. And in case we would hear the sentence the rod shakes the table, we would assume that the rod is a noun and it can be an agent of some event. This is how our knowledge of grammar can help us identify and learn the meanings of words. Before we will conclude this presentation, I have two reading tips for you. The first is a review of the research on syntactic bootstrapping by Cynthia Fisher and her colleagues. The second one is a review of the research on the theory of mind, which is a term often used as a synonym to the higher processes of social cognition. Both studies would give us a much deeper insight into the issues we briefly discussed in this presentation. That is all from me now. See you next time.